Hey, what's going on guys? My name is Madison Charlton from MLC Tech, and today you join us on what is a very sad day as we mark the end and death of the GTX 16 line of GPUs. May my 1650 4GB rest in peace. NVIDIA has finally ended the production of its GeForce GTX 16 series of GPUs, which is the last remains of the line of GTX branded graphics cards. So it looks like it's all RTX from here on out from now, so sit back and relax as we take a look back at the GTX 16 series cards and the end of its production. So back in December of last year, it was reported that NVIDIA was planning on ending the production of all remaining GTX 16 series GPUs by Q1 of 2024. And as of today, NVIDIA has finally discontinued the lineup and suspended all deliveries of its GTX 1660 Super, GTX 1660 Ti, 1650 Ti, GTX 1650 and 1650 Super, as well as the 1630 graphics card. And this news almost brings a tear to my eye as my good old trusted GTX 1650 is still actually going strong to this very day. But the news that we have today finally means the end of the GTX branding of NVIDIA GPUs. Now, the NVIDIA GTX branding has been around for such a long time, with the first cast usage naming convention going back to the GeForce 7 and GeForce 8 eras, with the likes of the 7800 GTX and the 8800 GTX. But NVIDIA only started to utilise this name scheme properly with the likes of the GTX 200 and GTX 400 series, which at this rate are more than a decade old. Which is absolutely crazy, as these are the cards that I was first looking into when I first started to get an interest into PC building and computers as a whole. The time just goes ever so quickly, and during this time these GTX line of cards, besides the GeForce GTS and GT series, which have long since been abandoned, with the term GT being used for the lower tier market for quite some time. Commonly, anything below a GTX 50 line of GPUs would adopt the GT name, for example a GT 640. And now the NVIDIA GeForce GTX branding lived on until the 10 series of GeForce cards, after which it was replaced by a new adversary in the industry, and that being the term RTX. And this mainly served as a rebrand for marketing purposes following the launch of the GeForce 20 series, which ushered the era of ray tracing and AI computing for the masses. So at its core, NVIDIA could have stuck with the GTX naming scheme, but they wanted to make this change to try and highlight the significance of RT cores being included with GPUs, though the adoption of ray tracing was very slow back then, and even then I would still say the adoption of ray tracing is still very slow to this day. Now, the last GeForce GTX cards was of course the 16 series of GPUs, which got off to quite a confusing launch as it released alongside the RTX 20 series, and mainly consisted of mainstream and lower tier GPUs. But as of today, the era of GeForce GTX is finally laid to rest. And it's quite sad to think, as looking back I have some quite fond memories of the GTX lineup of GPUs, and quite frankly I look back on this era as the golden age of GPU pricing and GPU price to performance. But let's take a little dive back through memory lane and let's go through some of the most notable and iconic GTX GPUs that are out there. Includes the GTX 680, the GTX 980 and the GTX 1080 Ti, which were absolute monsters of a card and coming in for a very reasonable price to performance. Something that we could only wish we could have to this very day, with the likes of a flagship monster 1080 Ti being released for less than £600. I just wish we could go back to the era where we could have monster flagship GPUs for that price. And during this time we also saw the launch of the GTX Titan series, which were fantastic GPU offerings in their own regard, serving as a more prosumer, serving as a great line between gamer GTX cards and the more professional quadro range of GPUs. There was just so many fantastic GPUs, all the way from the Tesla architecture from the 200 series, all the way up to the Turing architecture in the 10 series. And I myself have had a good handful of GTX line of cards, with my first ever GPU being a GeForce GTX 660. And then I went on to get a NVIDIA GTX 970 a couple years later. Then my next GPU after that being the GTX 1070. Then eventually 4 years later I finally upgraded to a flagship level GPU, where then I was able to then purchase myself an RTX 2080 Ti. So I owned a total of 3 GTX cards in my lifetime, but I've had experience with building PCs for friends and family with a whole range of other GTX cards as well. So I have very fond memories, and quite frankly the GTX lineup GPUs are sort of a core memory in my brain, as they were the foundations and formings of my interest in PC hardware and computer technology. Now, it's been 6 years since the introduction of NVIDIA RTX series GPUs, and so far we have seen a total of 3 families from this very lineup. The RTX 20 series, which used the Turing architecture, the RTX 30 series, which used the Ampere architecture, and now currently we're sitting on the RTX 40 series, which is the Ada Lovelace architecture. And the next chapter is expected to begin later this year with the launch of the RTX 50 series, that being the Blackwell lineup of GPUs. So while it's somewhat sad to see the end of an era when it comes to the line of GeForce GTX cards, it has also served a good purpose for me, as it's allowed me to take a good look back at some of the history of GPUs out there, and quite frankly it has allowed me to look back on some very fond and happy memories in my time in the tech space. And hey, the good news is you could potentially snag yourself a very good deal on a 16 series GPU, as retailers will try and clear out the remaining of their inventory for this line of GPUs, so it's very possible you might get yourself a sweet deal on a clearance GPU. Let me know all of your thoughts and opinions around this story in the comments down below. What do you think of the GeForce GTX era finally being laid to rest and coming to the end today? And share with me some of your fond memories of the GTX line of GPUs. What experiences and what GPUs of this lineup did you own? And while I'm super excited for you to share your fond memories in the comments down below, let me know if you would like a more in-depth story type video around my PC building experiences and all of the previous hardware and GPUs and PC builds I've done in the past, as quite frankly I could talk for hours and hours on all of my fond experiences, but today I've tried to keep it as short as possible so I don't go on a side tangent where I rant for hours on end. But if you would like a proper storytime video, do let me know in the comments down below, as I would love to make one for you. Anyway, I have been Madison Charlton from MLC Tech. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you liked it in any way, shape or form, make sure to give this video a like, and maybe subscribe for more content like this in the future. Thank you once again for watching today's video, and I hope to see you in another one soon. Goodbye for now.